Today, we are extremely fortunate to have Fireball Tim with us. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. Fireball is a Hollywood concept artist. So we're going to talk with him a little bit about what he's done and what he's doing right now and where he got the original spark. Fireball, if you could tell us some of your earliest influences and how the spark happened.
Well, I would say, the farthest back I could go as a kid is that my parents seemed to understand that it's important to feed a child's love of things, right? And to be able to identify that. And they were very good at understanding that I loved Hot Wheels, I loved Matchbox. I remember in the early days of Montessori, there was a store across the street. And my mom said if I had a really good day, we'd go across the street and we'd pick up a Matchbox car. And that was, probably 1969, something like that, 70. And they recognized that I loved cars, although there was no one else in the family that loved cars the way I did. And they recognized that I loved art supplies. I loved going into art stores, and they would buy me for my birthday an art box and just fill it with whatever they thought was kind of cool. They didn't know what things were, didn't know what a burnisher was or the difference between chalk and charcoal. They would just fill the box with anything so I could open it up and I could explore. And I had the freedom to be able to creatively try things not knowing really what they were. And they fed that my whole life. And they did that with my brother, became a Hollywood writer. Every one of us, 5 kids, and we all had different passions. So I think early on for me, and it certainly made me feel that way towards my offsprings, and tried to feed that in the same way. So it hasn't really changed. To this day, I still kind of do the same thing, although the cars are bigger, the lifestyle and the culture is much bigger. But I still get to draw on a daily basis and to do what I love. And I think it's important that, if you really truly love what you do, then you're going to make sacrifices. There's going to be difficult times, because there's going to be a lot of people that tell you need to get a job, you need to do other things. This is just a hobby, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But, I've done 400 films. I've done over 1,000 commercials. I've built my own brand, which is automotive pop culture. And I'm trying to share all those designs, the designs that I've done and the designs that we've loved over the years, from Starsky and Hutch to the General Lee to the Batmobiles and all the different variations, and to give that to the public. So that's kind of now what I focus on.
That's fantastic. And those are, of course, iconic designs, what you just mentioned right there. I mean, Starsky and Hutch, I grew up on all those shows.
Funny,
Batman.
I'll go to a convention and invariably someone will say, "Man, I didn't know you did the Starsky and Hutch car." And I'm like, "Dude, I was 11 years old when that show came out. I didn't do that." As much as I love those cars and they are iconic, a lot of them were just paint jobs because they didn't have any money back then. But the ones that I've designed over the years have been ones from the ground up. The '89 Batmobile, the cars for Flintstones, the Jurassic Park, a lot of those vehicles were purpose built for those films, and those are the fun ones to work on.
And you just mentioned Jurassic Park, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the first generation of the Ford Explorer, and you had a really cool paint scheme on it. And I want to say that shortly after the movie opened, those Explorers, they just couldn't keep them in stock. I mean, they were a huge seller for Ford.
Shows you the power of pop culture. Right? So there's something about being on the silver screen, being in popular culture, which puts it in the mindsets of people, and you have to be able to read that. It's something that, at least in my business, if we're designing and building a car for an upcoming film, you certainly have to be excited that that the film will do well. But there's a lot of cars and things I've done for movies that tanked, and the joke is the movie may suck, but the cars are always cool. Trash can, but you never know, and you hope for the best that a movie like Gone in 60 Seconds or Jurassic Park or some of these movies will do well, because in my business, the true sign of success is if they turn your car into a Hot Wheels car. And I think I've had the Batmobile done about 35 times over the years. So that was a successful design, I think.
I would say, yeah, that one's no slouch, and one of my all-time favorites. And you're gonna laugh here. I would imagine you'd know this film. This was early 80s, might be something like 81. There was a film that came out called Condor Man.
Oh, yeah.
And I was researching it the other day because I could have sworn that there were some Widowmakers, some of the old black Porsches with the whale tails and everything. And it turns out they weren't actual Porsches. They were kit cars that were made
Right.
to look like those Porsches. But that's what
Yeah.
stuck in my head. And what
Yeah.
also stuck in my head was that the movie was just really
Yeah.
not great, but it was the cars that stuck in my mind.
Yeah. We call those super cheese. It's just like really, really. There was Highwayman. There was a whole series of these shows. I mean, there was Arc Two. There was just all these shows that were just absolutely horrible. They were shot on a shoestring, no effects, but and they it's like Damnation Alley. The reason Damnation Alley got green lit and did pretty well is because there was virtually no sets. They built the truck. They put the money in the actors, Jan Michael Vincent and I think George Papard was in it. And they had just no other budget. They just had a bunch of guys out in the middle of nowhere, driving cars and doing some pyrotechnics and things like that. And there was a whole series of those movies. There was the destruction of Jared Sin. There was, which is like Mad Maxy kind of things. And those are always great because they're setless. They're out in the wasteland, and they're fun for all the people that work on them to just be out there and screw around.
Yeah, I mean, hey, the formulas worked for George Miller, right? So
Yeah.
why mess with it,
Yeah. Well, now his movies are much, much bigger because of the effects and the actors. And a lot of those cars for the last movie, they put the word out to custom car builders in Australia. And they said, if you build a Mad Max car, then bring it to set on this date. And that's how they wrangled all those cars. Instead of putting all the money in building all those cars, they actually just put the word out to all these builders and said, build a Mad Max car, bring it out to set, and we'll use it in the movie. And they got hundreds. They got hundreds of cars.
That's brilliant. I mean, what better exposure too for
Yeah.
the builders. So and
Absolutely.
what a genius plan just producing wise. So Fireball, when you were coming up and you were, like I said, you were getting Hot Wheels, you're going to the art store, you're getting all the raw materials. Would it be accurate to say that you were in the early phases, you were largely self-taught, or did you go back and get formal art training, or what kind of happened from there?
Well, I got in trouble a lot in school because I always carried in my back pocket a stack of index cards, and wherever I went, my back pocket was always full, and I always had a pen. So if I ran out of cards that day, I'd go back home and say to my mom, "I need another stack." And my mom and dad were writers. They were writing team. They were Hollywood writers. My dad wrote Bonanzas, Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, all this stuff. He was an icon. So the house was filled with index cards, and they were plentiful everywhere because they were always doing concepts, and that's the way you write a script, is that you come up with an idea, just one quick idea, you write it on an index card, you put it on the wall. And then as the wall fills up, then you start to put them in order and you start to create a story, and that's how screenplays are written. So for me, I would carry these stack of index cards. I tell you, one of the most amazing things of my life was when the index cards came out in colors. They were always white, and then all of a sudden there's these colors. I'm like, wow, this is great. But what I would do is I'd always sit in the back of class so I could sketch. And I always did a profile view of cars that had rocket launchers on them and X-rays and alien things. So, as far as self-taught, I think that I was responding to something inside me, as we all do, a calling that, that is saying, this is your purpose, and to keep following it. And I'm a firm believer that you got to wake up in the morning and you got to follow your passion initially. And the reason that you want to follow your passion is you set the tone for the day. So when you wake up and the first thing you do is something you love, then you vibrate high. And then the rest of the day is you maintain that level of vibration. You have a good day. There's all kinds of cool things that happen. And I'm always been a strong proponent of that. And you wake up and you say, oh, this day's going to be crap. And I got to deal with this. And so you wake up and with this low vibration, your whole day kind of goes south. And then you start blaming other people for why things are going bad. It's all you, man. So, I would listen to that calling in school, and I'd get in a lot of trouble because the teachers would catch me sketching, right? I just kept going, and I assembled stacks, and I still have them in my closets, piles of these weird cars. And sometimes I go back into them and I do a nice, really super cool version that I do now of that old original car. But then, I grew up in Ojai, and then at Palos Verdes, and then Ojai. And then I went to Ventura College. I took every art course that I could get my hands on, because I didn't really know what I wanted. I didn't know people could make money, doing what I really love to do. So I took all the crappy courses that made no sense. And then I remember one day I was going to class, and a friend of mine came out of the classroom and says, "I got in." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I was like, "Got into what?" He goes, "I got into Art Center." And I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a car design school." And I nearly soiled myself. It was like I'd never even heard of such a thing. And I said, "What is that?" And he starts explaining to me. And he wasn't into cars. He was into product design. And he wanted to design products and product graphics and things like that. But I had no idea that there was a design school specifically for cars. So I literally, from that moment, I ran down to the main offices. I changed all my classes to suit what Art Center required. And I told my teacher that I don't want to draw apples and oranges and trees. I want to draw cars because I want to go to Art Center. And he said he was a car designer, and he went to Art Center when it was called Chenard, or back in the early days. He was an old timer. So I assembled all that, and I put together my portfolio. I thought it was pretty slick. I looked at some of the things that they did, and honestly, I didn't know squat. I thought my portfolio was super cool. And I took it down there, and I walked into the gallery at Art Center, and I just thought, holy crap, there's no way I'm getting in here. Look at what these guys are doing. And I had no idea how they achieved these incredible tones and colors and things. I never heard of vellum. I never heard of any of that stuff. And then, to my surprise, they accepted me. This was 1985-ish, something like that. And I just set my sights on learning how to draw cars, how to design. And I had some of the greatest teachers in history. I had no idea at the time. I had Harry Bradley, who designed the split window Vet. I had Strother McMinn, who designed the Bat 21. I had access to so many great designers that were right there. In my class was Henrik Fisker, was Frank Stephenson, who became chief designer for Ferrari, Chip Foose, all these guys that were just like dudes, that I just knew. We're all like going to town, sketching, talking, not sleeping, eating terrible food. And then so we went from a class of 50 to a class of 7 that graduated. It was the most difficult thing, second most difficult thing, and I won't tell you what the first one was, but the second most difficult thing I'd ever done in my life. And for my final, I was up for 7 days straight. So, a lot of the guys just kind of disappeared. It was just too difficult. It was expensive, a lot of different things. But I was following my passion, and I just wanted, more than anything, to be able to draw cars at a level that I considered to be professional. And my mentor, long before Art Center, was a gentleman named Sid Mead, who created the spinners for Blade Runner, worked on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Aliens. He was one of the original concept artists. Very good friends with him. He took me under his wing, taught me a great deal of stuff. My other mentors online were Chris Foss. What's his name? No, it's been so many years since I've said so many of these names. But a lot of these guys that most people consider to be icons. I had access to these guys, and I took what they gave me and refined it and just kept going. So
sure. I had heard that my late father-in-law went to Art Center. He ended up being a pretty well-known car photographer, and he talked about, just like you just referenced, he talked about how tough it was there and how there were these kind of elimination stages if you couldn't hang in. So kudos to you, and for hanging in.
Brutal, just absolutely brutal. You can't see straight. You have 7 studio classes, and each one is demanding a tremendous amount. The kind of the way it worked is that, you would get an assignment from the teacher saying, I want 20 sketches by next week. So you think about all the sketches of the things that you're going to do and whatever the assignment was. And then you come into class and some moron over in the corner decides to do 25 instead of 20. I'm like, what? What's that? It was supposed to, you got a certain amount of wall space. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's how the game's played. I can deal with that. So next week you come in 30 sketches, right? Oh yeah, you're going to kick some ass, 30 sketches, but some dude in the corner's like got 40. And you're like, what? Wait, hold on. Right? So this was constantly happening to where there was no room that you could put up all the sketches in the classroom. So you start using the walls and the stuff outside, and then pretty soon, everybody's leveling up. But then people are starting to drop off like flies because they can't keep up with the pace. I was very fortunate in that I could understand pretty easily, especially with teaching me a lot about perspective. And I learned to be able to eyeball perspective and to eyeball ellipses and things like that very easily, very quickly, and to see what was wrong. And and just taking a sketch that you've done and flipping it around and putting it on the window, you can see immediately what's wrong with your sketch, right? So just to flip it over. So if anybody is out there drawing and you do a sketch and you think it looks cool, just flip it over, put it up on the window, and you go like, holy, that's totally wrong. So then it helps you to fix it, things like that. And it just kept going. It just kept escalating. It got more and more and more. Now you're talking about 7 classes. You're not talking about 40 sketches for one class. You're talking about 7 classes, and you're doing hundreds of sketches each week, and renderings and design concepts, and just, your life is obliterated. There's people that were married, then got divorced. People that had girlfriends, couldn't hold them up. I know one guy that had a girlfriend said, the only way that I can deal with this is to enroll myself in Art Center, which she did, So they both suffered, right? But I think cars have, on almost every level, have really been my passion on an epic scale. So it's not really so much design, but when you work on a movie, you're trying to decipher Dwayne Johnson as a car, Batman as a car. If Santa Claus had a car, what would it look like? You're trying to resolve these things through design language, in the same way that BMW designs a 3 Series to look like the 5 Series or whatever it is. The design language has to be cohesive, right? And the same thing happens in a movie. I worked on a movie called Plastic Man, didn't get made. I was on it for 9 months. But what kind of car would Plastic Man drive? And it would have to act like Plastic Man in some way, right? So as that grew and staying within the industry, I didn't have really so much of a public name as I do now, but I used to develop those stories because I grew up with writers. My parents being writers, it was always about story first, then comes the design, right? And Art Center was really more about inspiration first, then comes the design. And I disagreed with that. I didn't feel that was appropriate. And then as I got up to my 7th term, they demanded that I design a car for my senior project. And I wasn't going to do a car because I knew I wasn't going to go to Detroit and freeze my ass off. I was going to do something entertainment based. So I sold them on an idea that I did that was entertainment, and it was a maglev train. And I built this whole train system that had dry ice and was fully lit and all this stuff. And everyone laughed at me. They just thought, what's that? That's not a car. You're never going to get a job, right? We're going to get all the jobs in Detroit, and you're going to suffer. And I ended up getting a job, getting paid twice what the car guys were getting paid, because I got hired by Walt Disney Imagineering at the end of 7th term. I wasn't even finished with school. And I contacted them, and they came up to the school. I'd never been there before. So I worked there for a number of years, but cut to 25 years later, and the entertainment division now at Art Center is their number 1 division.
Really?
They saw that the entertainment industry has a lot of money, and they can partner with studios and a lot of that stuff. So, and then it became, entertainment is in relation to film and television, but also into gaming. Right. So concept art became a really big deal, and now it's huge there. Right. But the problem is that now there's a lot of people graduating Art Center and being influxed into the film industry, and there's not enough populace there to support them because only about 100 movies get made 10% of those are event films like Star Wars and Marvel. So now my world is car shows. I have a number of shows on television. I have a new show that's coming to television at the end of this year called Best of Show, and we just do a lot as far as car culture and as far as the development of the brand and entertainment and people's love of film and cars, that mergence. So it's pretty cool.
I just watched Blade Runner last night again, the original, and wow, I mean, to be under Sid Mead's tutelage, what a
Yeah.
what a gift.
What I did was I was working at a B. Dalton bookseller. You may remember those
Sure.
booksellers. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't exist anymore. But I was going to Ventura College, and I was working at the bookstore, and I found Sid's book Sentinel One, and I was beside myself. I'd never seen anything like it, and I just thought, this is what I want to do, what this guy does. And I just kept on looking at the book, looking at it just over and over. And eventually my boss came over and said, "Hey man, we got to let you go because you're spending more time looking at that book than working, but you can keep the book." And I was like, okay, So I got fired from that job. And then on the back of the book was Sid's contact info. And I called him up. He was living in Hollywood on Gardner Street. And I said, "Can I come down and meet you? Because I got so many questions. I need to understand." So I went down on a Friday and I spent almost the whole day at his studio watching him. And he was working on Blade Runner at the time. He was doing paintings
Wow.
for Blade Runner. So I got to see the originals, and I've had that experience many times. I was on set for Star Wars as a kid. I got to see, and I didn't know what it was just because my parents were hiring Apogee, which became ILM, hired them to work on a series that they were working on. So I walked through the set and saw all the ships on stocks, and I saw the Millennium Falcon. I remember it clear as day. But I spent the next year going down every single Friday to visit Sid every single week. I did it for 52 weeks and spent the whole day and just sat by his side as he did Blade Runner. He did a number of other movies, that was like 81 or something like that. I forget what year that was. So I got to, experience a lot of those things and learn from that stuff and then try to apply it to my own style because he was an icon, and he certainly influenced me and a lot of other people. But like I said, there was other artists that I had access to. Mobius was one, a very, very famous French science fiction artist. Jean Girard, I would recommend anyone look him up and look at his stuff. So so just over the years, I just developed that style, which is kind of what I have now, and I feel blessed that I can wake up and do that stuff on a daily basis.
I would assume the accurate word is apprentice. To apprentice with someone like that, you can't put a price tag on that. What an amazing experience for you to have.
And maybe we do kind of attract those situations, and I think that when you love something that much. I was fortunate because my dad was a writer and he gave Chuck Norris his first start. So, we took martial arts from Chuck as starting at 4 years old. He was a family friend for a very long time. I got to see him become a star. I saw him go from a karate instructor to being on a first episode of Room 222, which my dad wrote, to getting Breaker Breaker, doing Way of the Dragon. I got to watch all that. And then we had another family uncle that was Bobby Hull, who was a big hockey player. And, we went to Canada and stayed on his farm. And he was just like a regular guy that ended up being, the Golden Jet, right? These are just people that worked at a very high level. So I learned at a very young age about concept to completion, about having an idea and believing in that idea as being the norm, and then following that idea through to its fruition. And then, working in film of doing a sketch of the Batmobile, and then a couple of years later going to the movies when it came out at the Bruin and seeing the car sitting there in all its glory, and then people watching it is a pretty tremendous experience. So I recommend you follow your dreams regardless of what anyone says.
Well, that's a great message that should be out there in everybody's mind and heart, and so I thank you for sharing it. I wanted to ask you about some of the other cars. I mean, the Batmobile is huge. I think, when I saw the original, we're talking about the first film that Tim Burton did. And did you do it for the first two films, the Batmobiles, or did you do it throughout all of them when it switched directors to Schumacher later on?
We're all friends of mine. So Tim Flattery did the third film. Harold Belker did the fourth film. The Tumbler was done by Nathan Crowley. So these are all friends of mine, and that I've worked with over the years. And it's kind of like this micro club of guys that have done Batmobiles. I didn't do the second one because I wasn't available at the time, but that was basically the Bat missile and the how they covered the Batmobile up in that skeletal thing. And my involvement, I mean, I just have to be honest that there's really no car that I've ever done that really wasn't a team effort. I can't take credit for the design of probably any of the cars that I've done, because it's the honest thing is, unless I just did a sketch, I can say I did this sketch, right? This is my sketch. But when you take a sketch and then you go to build, there's a lot of unanswered questions. When you do with a three-dimensional vehicle that has to perform and do all these things. So there's a lot of people involved to be able to do that, and it's important that those people are acknowledged, because my strength is as a concept person, not as a builder. Is that there's a lot of things I don't do well, but the one thing I think I'm strongest at is ideas, and I get paid by studios. I get brought into studios to talk about upcoming films and to see how those films would be expanded out into the world through social and different aspects, and the strength of those ideas. And it's fun to be in that world of concept. And I did that throughout my tenure at Imagineering. Worked on the Indiana Jones ride, redid the cars for Autopia, New Tomorrowland, which became Star Wars. So a lot of Star Wars that you go and see there, those original concepts that became Star Wars because the design language changed, were original ideas that we did in Tomorrowland. And it was going to be Tomorrowland 2077 when I was there. And then they shut that project down. We went and did other things. I even worked on Design Belle's house for Beauty and the Beast, Toontown, lots of different things. So, as a designer, you don't want to be stuck in one area, and you want to explore. So now at this point, I can do virtually any design language. I can do futuristic vehicles that were built in the Victorian era. I can do steampunk. I can do, I can merge two languages together and come up with something weird. So, the Batmobile was kind of like that. It was if Batman was a car, what would that be? And in the script, I think it was something as simple as it was large, black, and intimidating. And that was the only description,
One film I was going to ask you about, and then I was going to pop into asking you some other memorable builds that you did on some films or sketches and being involved in the design. Did you happen to work on Minority Report, the one where Lexus had this concept car and Tom Cruise kind of got built into one of them while it was on an
No,
assembly line?
that was Harold Belker. That was my friend Harold who did that film. The car was commissioned by Lexus, and it was done as a concept car. I think the car, last time I saw it, was at the Toyota Museum in Southern California, that's down in Orange County, Toyota Lexus. That was a long time ago, so I'm not sure where that car is now. But Harold did the futuristic cars that went sideways, and he's a very good designer. He did cars for the new version of Total Recall. So a lot of great stuff over the years, and he was in my class at Art Center also.
Very cool.
Yeah, great film. Good stuff.
Any other cars that just kind of pop out? I mean, of course, the Batmobile is huge. Anything else that you just really enjoyed working on, or anything else that you would say was kind of like a banner piece for you that ended up being in a pretty big film?
People ask me all the time, "What's my favorite car?" It's like, it's the
That's
one
hard.
with four wheels, right? So, I love people's stories, and so I go to shows, and people will say to me, "Oh man, I love the cars you did for Flintstones." Or I love Gone in 60 Seconds, or I love Austin Powers, and all of those were unique experiences. We didn't know what we had. It was just like a car. I mean, it's like when Back to the Future came out, that was designed by Andy Probert, who's a friend of mine I worked with at Disney. Andy did the initial concepts for the DeLorean, and as well as Ron Cobb. Ron Cobb was a very good friend. We did a couple of movies together, and Ron was an old timer like Sid. I learned a lot from him. He was a political cartoonist, and then he did move. There you go. Yeah, right on. So Ron was also a concept artist on the movie Alien, the initial stuff with Giger and the ships. He created a lot of those designs. But uh, the to see my friends do some of those things. I love when people succeed, and you do something like Back to the Future, and you don't know what you got. And what I experience most of the time when I do a lot of Comic Cons, I did the New York Comic Con at the end of last year, and young people will come up to me who were, they weren't alive when these movies came out, and now to them it's folklore. It's like they weren't. You and I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm assuming you were in line for Aliens for as long as I was,
Early
right?
50s, early 50s, and yes.
Yeah, so you're a little bit younger. But I remember being at the Avco in West LA in line for Aliens for 9 hours. And the line was 10 people wide and it went around the block twice. And we brought beach chairs and we brought food. And we were out there having the greatest time. And the theater held 2,000 people. And we went in there and it was so loud. It was the most incredible experience. I think it was 1980, 82 or 84 that Aliens came out. We lived the 80s. We lived the early 70s and the 80s. And now, young people look at the 80s like this iconic time where all this stuff exists. Like, we didn't know what the hell we were doing back in the 80s. But for us, it was that time where the studios were not afraid to do new ideas, and in all the Schwarzenegger movies and all the Stallone movies, Jean-Claude Van Damme. I did Time Cop. Just did a lot of these movies with these guys, and I knew all these guys, and they were just like normal guys that became these icons. And now, the studios are only interested in doing remakes and rebuilding existing brands. And it's very rare that they want to take a chance. They may do things off of books now because you can. Like the Foundation series on Apple is great. There's just a lot of shows that are really good now. But they're making, more remakes and less big event films like that. But back then, every movie, Last Action Hero was a unique idea. No one had ever done it before, right?
Yep, yep, absolutely.
And they just went bonkers. People were going crazy to get in line to see these movies, and we lived that. We were that age, and that excitement powered us to where I still feel that vibration. If I think about it, of what it was like to be in line for Back to the Future 2, because the first one was so good. Then they said, sequels will never be as good as the first. Like, oh, hell yeah, they were phenomenal, right?
Yeah, and you could see homages being paid too to work of the past, because I remember seeing Fifth Element in the theaters in the 90s.
A lot of people didn't like Blade Runner when it first came out, because it was depressing and dark. But as it started to get a foothold, the design language really affected every sci-fi film from that point on. Fifth Element, the main concept artist of that was a guy named Jacques Ray. He's no longer around, but Jacques did some fantastic stuff, and Mobius was on that film. They hired Mobius to do a lot of that stuff. And there's another film, I forget what it's called, if you just research Mobius a bit. But Fifth Element is one of my favorite movies because it is so unique.
I like it. I mean, I got into a huge debate because I went with someone, and I love Blade Runner too, but I went with I was a film brat. Years ago, got a BFA in film, and so we used to go out, and I don't do this as much anymore, but go out and like hyper analyze the films afterwards, talking about the lighting and the acting and all the stuff.
Yeah.
And there was this big debate among, I think it was four of us, about, was it ripping off Blade Runner or not? And there was some initial, banter about that, but then it was just like, but no, the film is so much more. It's a standalone. It's so much more than that. If anything, it was probably an homage to that with the flying cars. This was a flying taxi, and and there were so many other design elements too. And I loved the whole Jean-Paul Gaultier and the music, and it had its own mojo. I mean, it was different.
It is hard to not be influenced, in the same way that I probably, I was very influenced by Sid's work. But I think what you try to do, when a lot of teachers look at tracing as being bad, right? And the good thing about, from the simplest form, the good thing about tracing is that you get into the mindset of the original artist so that you can understand how they achieved what they did. And then you take that and you expand on it, right? And film is that way. So, I forget the director's name for The Fifth Element. He's done a lot of superb films.
Luc Besson. Yeah.
So, I'm sure that Luke and his team were, you can't not be affected by Blade Runner because it's so successful in its design language that you look at that and say, oh man, we just want to trace that and then expand on how do we make that better? How do we create a world that's unique like that? Because when Sid was doing Blade Runner, some of his inspirations were things like Barbarella and Logan's Run, and just some of these very unusual 70s cheesy sci-fi movies. But no one had ever really done one that was, up until Star Wars. And there's a lot of Star Wars and Blade Runner. There's a lot of that techie, unclean kind of look. And you could say that Blade Runner ripped off Star Wars a little bit or was inspired by some of it. But in the world of sci-fi, it's very important to understand the difference between science fiction fantasy and science fiction. And most people don't necessarily understand that, don't accept those terms. But it's true that science fantasy is something that feels like science fiction, but it has no relation to Earth. And science fiction is something that shows future Earth, like Star Trek, future Earth, Blade Runner, future Earth, even Fifth Element, future Earth.
Right. 2001, but yeah, a
Yeah,
little bit.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But Star Wars, created its own thing, and obviously it's very different. And there's a lot of criticism on Star Wars for some of the series where they start to make it look like Earth with streets, and there was a kids Star Wars series, I forget what it was called, Skeleton Crew or something like that, and people didn't like it because it was too close. It wasn't inventing its own populace and its own design language, and because Star Wars has nothing to do with Earth and never has. And it's important that when you tell a story that's like that, you have to steer clear of terminology like saying, hey, what's up, dude? You don't say that in Star Wars, right? There's things that you do and things that you don't. And people know it inherently within themselves what fits within that language. And they can pick that. You can go to a movie and you can say, that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? The color pink doesn't belong anywhere in a Batman film. So maybe it does, when it comes to a evil villainous or something. I don't know. But you had to pay attention to those things. And when it's done successfully, if you can go into the theater and you can watch a movie for 2 hours and it feels like 10 minutes and you've lost yourself, then you've had a success. And Blade Runner was that for me. I just looked at that and my jaw was scraping along the ground, for the 2 hours that I watched that film. Same thing with Alien, a lot of those movies that came out at that time.
I'm a huge fan of the original Blade Runner too. How did you feel about the sequel, 2049?
Well, the first thing I would recommend for anyone who criticizes a film like that is, we go in with very high expectations, especially on a movie like Blade Runner, and we really don't. We know what we don't like, but we don't necessarily know what we like, right? But if you were to go into that movie and watch the movie for the first time, and you come out and you're like, oh crap, blah blah blah, all stuff, and then in the lobby, Ridley Scott is standing there, and he says, hey, let's go back and watch the movie again with me this time. And now you're gonna go in there and you're gonna be a little bit more respectful and understand that 3,000 people worked on a film for 3 years, and all of them wanted it to be the best thing that they could do, and the decisions that they make, and you'd have a little different perspective about it, right? And that's really what people are missing. It's like the world is crap if you think it's crap. The world is amazing if you think it's amazing, right? So we decide every day what it becomes for us. I'm not a religious person, but this was in the Bible, Adam naming things. He wasn't naming bears and giraffes. He was saying this is either good or bad. And I think Shakespeare said, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you go and you see these movies, it's very easy to criticize, right? But I think that 2049 was successful on a lot of levels. And number one, they went and did it despite the fact that a lot of people thought they shouldn't. It was Ridley's vision. Sid worked on it and did all the design work for the Las Vegas sequences.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Ryan was in it and risked criticism and being involved with something like that. Everybody supported it. I think as a standalone movie, I think it's fantastic. It's visually interesting and unique. It harkens. It doesn't have the exact same feel. It has memory attachments to it between the music and some of the characters. But it's also a kind of a standalone thing. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they're doing a Blade Runner series that's coming up. So I believe it's either 2066 or 2099 is the name of it. So, and they're filming that right now. So that's going to be a series probably on Apple or something like that. I forget which one it is. But they're a lot of the, if you look at some of the influences later on in comics and short films for Blade Runner, it goes very anime. It goes very JDM. It goes very very much into the Asian perspective. And Blade Runner really wasn't that. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how they expand that world, because now Blade Runner is the same galaxy as Alien is. And they're making that connection, right?
Wow.
And you understand that from Tyrell, how Tyrell transitions from and the next one transitions from Blade Runner to Alien, and those whole series of movies is all one story. And even Predator is part of that same story. So now they're just kind of filling in the blanks. It's like, oh, we have this section of time where Predator 2 and Predator 3 missed, or the last Predator has to meet up with the first Blade Runner. So in the next maybe 5, 6 years, 10 years, you'll be able to watch one continuous story over 25, 30 films. Yeah. And so there's a movie called Soldier with Kurt Russell.
Sure, I know it.
Yeah. So Soldier is part of the Blade Runner universe. In fact, when he's stuck on that planet and it's all junk, he walks right past a spinner from Blade Runner.
Oh my gosh.
And he's at Tannhauser Gate. He's one of the soldiers, one of the replicants that was one of the early replicants that was built. So if you go back and you watch that movie, you'll start to see all these Easter eggs pop up from Blade Runner.
I have to rewatch it.
Yeah, same universe. So you just have to, you kind of pay attention, and I've known Kurt for a long time. Kurt played Elvis in the movie my dad wrote and produced called Elvis back in the 80s. And then later on, I did Escape from LA with him and
Sure.
For a year. Amazing individual, super cool.
I've heard as much. Yeah, I heard he's fantastic.
Yeah. He's one of very few in Hollywood that are really extraordinary individuals. So, and once again, to reiterate, it's about story. It's always been about story. And if you can, in the same way, my dad was a master storyteller. We had 5 kids and we had a big round dining room table, and he would tell stories and you're just glued, right? And we would read Shakespeare together and he would explain what's about to happen. I just didn't want to play a female part, but every now and then you do whatever. But, when you understand, you go to a car show and you talk to someone about their car, they're telling you stories, and that's what this podcast is about, these stories. It's, and hopefully some of your listeners who weren't necessarily there when Aliens came out, you can tell a story of a fight that broke out. We went into the theater. It's about 2,000 people, and all these people brought instruments. So they went up front, and now we had a band that was playing, waiting for the movie to come on. There was a saxophone guy and a trumpet guy, and they had all this planned, right? And this is what you did back then. You couldn't do that in theaters now, right?
Right.
But it was like this event, right? So at one point, there was this competition going back and forth between two sides of the theater. And one side was screaming, "Less filling." And the other side was screaming, "Tastes great." And as the lights drop and the movie starts, it was just this chill that you had of this experience. And those are the things that I'm sure that you miss, that we all miss.
Yeah.
And why it's important to not just watch a movie on your Netflix at home.
Oh yeah.
Go and have this experience in a theater.
First time I experienced that, not quite as colorful with the exchange, but the first time I experienced that after a big lull was when I went to go see Top Gun Maverick. I think Spielberg said, "Hey, Tom Cruise saved Hollywood," by bringing that film into theaters and having it do so well. And it was a big spectacle, and it had the classic patriotic, but also just positive endorphin inducing scenes and elements in it. Right film, right time.
Yeah.
And that crowd, you knew it was going to be a billion dollar picture because the crowd responded that way.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
super
And
jazzed about it.
we're certainly in a mode of transition, I think, a lot with a lot of the state of the world, um, on a lot of levels, for everything from design and technology and Elon and his chips and politics and a lot of stuff. And I think it's important that whatever side you're on anything, is a good life is created through practicing peace and patience for yourself. If I can live my life and for the rest of my life and not get angry about anything or not go bonkers, that's a good life. And you don't change people because you make them wrong. You change them by inspiring them to change, to be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
It's great that films still come out in the theaters. I hope that young people get to experience that. But the only constant is change. And if they don't, something else will evolve out of that. Like right now, there's a big battle over AI. Is that
Yeah.
some people hate AI, some people accept it. But the thing to recognize is it's not going away. AI is not something that is a fad that's going to disappear in 5 years or something else. And your job as an artist, as I am, is to find a way to make it work for you as a separate tool that's much like a pencil is akin to a pen. And find a way to work with it, because the goal is ultimately to be happy, not to be screaming and yelling at people because they're doing something that you don't like. Peace is a choice, and passion is a choice. And like with the podcast, you got to take actions on the things that you love the most. My brand is automotive pop culture. There is music pop culture. There is food pop culture, right? So the thing is that I think the system in play for me, as I see it, is that you find what you love, you do it in an extraordinary way, and then you try to give it, right. I've gotten to do all these films and to do all this great stuff, and I've been all over the world. There's even a side of me that I can mention after this that is not the normal me, and it's probably more famous than anything I've ever done.
Wow.
But there's gaming culture, pop culture, right? So it's really about finding that thing that you love and doing that thing to the best of your ability and to where you can't go any further, and then finding a way to give that culture to the masses in some way. But in the early 90s, my wife at the time, it was not my ex-wife, my wife at the time, was a costume builder, and she built Cujo, the actual
Oh,
dog.
wow.
And she built Saint Bernard costumes that were worn by Dobermans. The Saint Bernards weren't so smart, and the Dobermans were very smart. So she built
Yes.
costumes to look like, and then she built a dog to slam his head against the side of the car because you couldn't get the dog to do that. But we got the contract from Nintendo to build all the Super Mario costumes for
Wow.
commercials all through the 90s and the 2000s. And I'm Super Mario. And
No kidding.
we traveled all over the world and shot 30 or 35 commercials. And I was Super Mario, and I'm also Yoshi. My ex-wife's ex-husband at the time is Luigi. She played Princess Peach. We shot in Athens. We shot in the Virgin Islands. So if you go on YouTube and just look up Super Mario commercial, where we're playing soccer, we're jumping out of airplanes, just all this stuff, and we did that for years. I go to conventions now. I go as a concept artist to like Batman conventions or things like that, and then I go to Nintendo conventions where I'm the only person that actually played Super Mario.
That's so
Yeah, it's been
cool.
fun.
My whole thing is just a celebration of iconic cars and films and soundtracks. And on that music piece, I was just going to ask you, you've been more than generous with your time, but any particular artist, musical artist who comes out, or any particular film, I always go to, I know it's a popular one for us car folks, but Bullet and the chase scene, and Lalo Schifrin, who wrote that brilliant score. It just, to me, seems like the perfect marriage of all three. But I was just wondering if, aside from that, if you have any picks that you'd throw out into the ether.
Lalo's theme for Enter the Dragon was a big one. I loved that film. I was at the perfect age when that film came out. I was like 11 or 12, so martial arts was a big deal. And, I'd trained with Chuck for a long time. But also, one that stands out for me was a very small part, but I learned early how music can really enhance a film. Because you're not meant to when you watch a movie and there's music, and you're not meant to pay attention to the music. The music is meant to enhance the emotion. And if the music gets in the way, then you start to notice the music and not watch the film. So their film Logan's Run was a great film in using music in that way. And I remember to this day, this movie came out like I think 1972 or 73 maybe, and I was 8 years old, and I still remember the moment that Logan and Jessica left out of the cave where they experienced Box, the mirrored character that wanted to kill them, and they saw the sun for the first time. And I remember that moment and how the music crescendoed at that moment. And that solidified in me how powerful music can be for film. And I always remembered that. And even at 8 years old, and I still go back and watch that movie every now and then. It still kind of holds up, even though it's early 70s. And a lot of movies like Bullet didn't use a lot of music. It was very limited. But now music gets used a lot, and sometimes it's overused. There's good stuff. You remember there's things like all the John Williams themes. It's like I could hum a theme to you and you're going to know what I'm talking about, right? But there's a lot of films that you wouldn't get necessarily. Although Star Wars in the first three films was iconic, you can't hum the theme to Star Wars #9.
It's true.
Or some of like Last Action Hero, you wouldn't be able to get the theme, right? So Williams was iconic in being able to capture that sweet spot where you could have those big, tremendous scores that enhance the film, but not so much that you lose sight of the film, but you come out of the film humming the music, just like it went into your subconscious.
Yeah. I was watching Heat the other day, and there's the scene where Al Pacino gets off the helicopter, jumps in, I think, what was an Infinity J30, because this was mid-90s, and he chases and catches up with De Niro's Cadillac, and then they go off to the diner. And the piece of music that's going, and it's the only thing is that you hear is the music and maybe a little bit of car acceleration, a little bit of engine acceleration, and it's all instrumental, and it's just brilliant. And it's just, so you find these pieces here and there that are just perfectly matched to what's going on.
Film you go into is that there's so many ways to screw up a movie. You can have bad writing, bad directing, bad editing, and everything in between. So it's amazing that a movie comes out at all and is good, right? So it's rare that Spielberg does a bad movie. I'm looking forward to Disclosure Day and all the effects that happen because of it, all the real world stuff that might happen because of it. There are certain masters that are out there that as filmmakers, and you kind of guarantee that the stuff's going to be good. And in Ridley Scott's one of those, Cameron's one of those. And I've gotten to work with all these guys. I worked with Spielberg on Jurassic, a couple of other projects. I even did a project that was right after Jurassic Park. And it was going to be Stan Winston's debut film as a director.
Wow.
So it was very exciting. If you're familiar with Stan, he built all the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. And it was right at the cusp of where CG was starting to come in, but it wasn't quite there. And it was kind of like a big budget version of Harry and the Hendersons, where it had this large creature that was discovered like a Bigfoot and his relationship with the little girl. And Stan developed technology that was called, I think it was called bounce back. Through this whole wire system, they could get this character that was not a costume because it was too big. It was 15 feet tall, but it was a character, to run down the street, but being held by wires, and it just looked phenomenal. And actually, I was storyboarding this film with him for 6-7 months, for a long time, and got to understand him as a director. And then unfortunately he passed away. It was very sudden and stuff. But I've gotten to work with a lot of these guys, and they all have different styles, and it's made me look at filmmaking constantly from a different perspective, ask different questions, and improve my ability as a concept person, as someone that has to come up with ideas and develop ideas. So, now I'm kind of at the age, where a lot of those guys, Sid's gone now, and Ron Cobb's gone. A lot of these icons that I looked up to that were my mentors, I'm kind of getting into that realm, and I don't look at myself as anything like those guys, But I think that I still have a tremendous amount of stuff in me to get out. And I get to share that with, through our stores and things like that with the public, and get to meet with people and do a lot of shows, a lot of events and stuff. So it's really a great life to be able to do that. The ultimate golden nugget out of this podcast is if you come to Ventura and you go on the pier, there's a taco place there. You'll have the best tacos you've ever had anywhere.
What's the name of it?
It's just called the Taco Shack. So,
cool.
Yeah, I'd recommend that you do that. Car culture up here is epic. I had a car museum for a long time in Oxnard, and now I'm working on some new projects as far as television goes, several new TV shows, and just a lot of stuff that's online. But I also have an entire line of coloring books that are automotive, and we're in about 300 car museums now.
Website that I can just kind of shout out real quick for the folks that are. Yeah.
There's two. The main one is fireballtim.com. We have about 375,000 subscribers, and it's all automotive pop culture.
Okay.
And then the store, we have actually 3 stores, but the main store is fireballtimgarage.art. And you can go in there into the search, and you can type in almost any famous movie and TV car that you can think of, and you'll get an illustration that I've done. I've done about 2,500 illustrations now, and you can get your favorite car, whether it's a General Lee or Dukes of Hazzard, or Starsky and Hutch. You can get those on a variety of products. So whatever you're a fan of, you can go there and you can research that. And there's a lot of obscure ones like the Big Bus.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, a lot of really bad ones. But you got to do stuff for those guys also, because
sure,
it's fun.
Last question: do you do commissions for people? Like if they, all these people that have like really cool cars out here, if they want something done, they can contact you.
Yeah, I do a lot of those, and I'm actually doing 2 this week. So I do 2 or 3 a week, something like that. And every now and then, once every couple of months, I do what's called Free Sketch Week, and that means anybody who contacts me after I post that it's Free Sketch Week, if they contact me, they'll get a free rendering of their car.
Wow.
But my normal fee is about $300 to do one of those sketches. I do a lot of those. They're really fun. I get to draw things that I wouldn't normally draw because it's very close to people's hearts, their trucks and their cars that they have. And there's great stories, like this car belonged to my dad. He bought it when it was new, and now I have it, this kind of stuff. So a lot of fun. Yeah, super cool.
Very, very cool. Tim, thanks again to everybody out here who ends up watching this. Thank you for tuning in. And Tim, I really hope we can meet in person here sometime soon.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.